Have you ever noticed that a relationship with a narcissist leaves the victim feeling more and more sick as the narcissist seems to get better and better? In fact, today I want to share with you 10 common physical and or emotional things that victims of narcissistic abuse wind up suffering with by the end of the relationship with a narcissist. So, that being said, let's dive in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner and the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where I meet live on Zoom every week and I do the inner work with survivors from all over the world of childhood trauma together. Here on my YouTube channel, we talk about what healing is about, what it looks like, the symptoms of unhealed trauma. But in the School of Transformation, we do the inner healing together. So if you're ready to take the next step, make sure you join me weekly on Zoom. For years now, I have said that narcissistic abuse reminds me of Munchausen by proxy. And that's a condition where a caregiver will make their own child sick just to gain sympathy, admiration, or control. I think the biggest example of that is Gypsy. If you have not heard her story, where she was controlled and abused by her mom, and sadly, in the end, she wound up killing her mom. But that is a classic example of Munchausen by proxy. Well, to me, narcissistic abuse is like emotional Munchausen by proxy. But in the case of narcissistic abuse, the abuser doesn't just make you physically ill. They subtly manipulate your emotions, your thoughts, and even your body to weaken you while strengthening their own power. Because the more weak you appear, the stronger they feel. It's like being poisoned by carbon monoxide. You can't see it, you can't detect it, and yet it's slowly draining the life out of you. I know in my case, when I reflected back on relationships in my life, there was one relationship where I feel like when I went into that relationship, I was my best self. I was at the best place in my life. I would say my energy was here. I was excited, passionate, and myself, except that I had unhealed trauma that I didn't realize. So anyway, I started here. By the end of the relationship, I felt drained, exhausted, and a whisper of the person that I once was. And everything that I felt was damaging to me in the relationship, by the end of the relationship, I couldn't detect it in the other person because they seemed to just get better and better and better at appearing like they were doing everything great and I was the problem, that it was so confusing. And that's the crazy thing about narcissistic abuse, because normally we thrive when our family members or our significant other is thriving, right? When they're thriving, it's like we're pinging off of each other and it lifts us up. When a family member is suffering, it affects us detrimentally. In fact, I remember somebody telling me, you can only be as happy as your unhappiest child. In other words, when your family members are down, it brings you down. That's normal. That's a healthy relationship because we have empathy and care for our family members. Well, narcissistic abuse defies all of that because it's almost like the weaker you get, the stronger they feel. The more depressed you are, the happier they are. And what begins to happen is you start noticing your changes, right? You start noticing like, wow, I used to be really happy. I used to be a person that had a long fuse. And now I'm like overreacting really fast. I'm angry. I'm depressed. Like these are things that aren't who I really was. I must be the problem with what's going on in the moment. And narcissists love when you do that because when you start blaming yourself, they're actually feeding off of your confusion, off of your shame that's being brought up, and they're looking better and you're looking worse. And the scary thing that's happening in this process, I call it sometimes the personality swap, right? Of the victim and the narcissist, they change personalities. What's ultimately happening is you're losing control of your life, and this person is gaining 24/7 control, not only of your external world, but your inner world as well. And just like carbon monoxide poisoning, narcissistic abuse, especially with a covert narcissist, is so dangerous because it really is so hard to detect. It's very subtle. Sometimes it creeps in over time, making you feel emotionally suffocated and physically drained without ever really understanding Why? There are no bruises, there are no broken bones. It's just a slow deterioration of your well being inside and out. And I think that's what makes it even harder is that narcissists, especially covert narcissists, they're in it for the long con, right? They'll wait you out. And so it's the slow, insidious way that they coercively control you that causes so much confusion. I kind of liken it to when you've ever been at the ocean, right? You're just having a good time. You're in the ocean, you're enjoying the water, and then you get out. Now, this happened to me when I was younger. I got out and I was like, someone stole all my stuff because in my head, I hadn't moved an inch. So when I went out, I fully expected all of my belongings to be exactly where I left them. What I hadn't realized was how the tide was slowly carrying me away. So, yes, I left my things where they were, but I was no longer in the same place. And that's often how we feel after a relationship with a narcissist. It's like we're ready to go back to being us, right? We expect to be the person that we remember ourselves being. And it's almost like we're not there anymore. And in reality, it's not that our authentic self or our real self is gone as much as the abuse, just like the tide, has carried us outside of the bounds of who we really are for so long that we've developed coping skills and habits that keep us from being us. So let's talk about those 10 things that so many victims of narcissistic abuse sadly relate to developing as a result of the relationship. And I would be so curious to know how many you identify with. The first one is chronic fatigue. You may have entered the relationship with a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of excitement in your life. You leave the relationship or somewhere in the middle of the relationship, you're drained. You have no energy. You can't get out of bed. Things that were easy to do, even like chores. I remember standing in the kitchen and looking around and feeling like doing the dishes would be so overwhelming. But all these things start to feel impossible when you're battling chronic fatigue. Number two is digestive issues. The reality is that our gut-brain connection is so strong that as a result of long-term stress, we wind up with stomach problems, nausea, bloating, irritable bowel syndrome, because the stress is just impacting our digestion so deeply. Number three are headaches and migraines. The constant emotional strain triggers tension headaches or full-blown migraines that seem to have no clear cause. Now, here's the interesting thing with a lot of people that I work with one-on-one doing somatic experiencing. It's so amazing the emotional connection that a lot of our physical illnesses or physical challenges have. And once we start connecting the two, it's amazing the difference that you might feel. So, for anyone that is battling any kind of physical illness that you're struggling to work through, I really want to encourage you not to disregard your doctor, but to also include or be curious about the psychosomatic connection that might be taking place that might be actually fueling the physical side of it. Number four are sleep disorders, insomnia, having restless sleep, or simply waking up feeling unrefreshed. And then number five is something that I'm seeing more and more frequently are autoimmune disorders. The prolonged stress causes your body to start attacking itself. So you might develop conditions like arthritis or lupus. So let's look at 5 emotional or psychological things that can happen as a direct result of narcissistic abuse. The first one is anxiety and panic attacks, where you're constantly feeling on edge, overwhelmed, or constantly fearful, even if there's no clear danger. You could be alone in a room, and yet it's so clear that there's a lack of safety on the inside. The reality is that narcissistic abuse is constantly provoking your nervous system to be hyperactive in anxiety or going into number 2, hypoactive, which can lead to depression. You might feel helpless, hopeless, lost, almost like, why bother trying? And in this emotional state, it's really hard to see a way out or a way through what you're going through. Number 3 is imposter syndrome, where you actually begin to doubt your worth, your talents, and even who you are as a person. Because the narcissist is constantly telling you that you're not good enough or projecting themselves into you, over time, sadly, you can begin to internalize and believe it. Number 4 is hypervigilance, where you're always on guard. You never feel safe. Basically, your body is stuck in a fight or flight state because you never know when the next emotional attack will come. And healing from this is very challenging because the hypervigilance is actually trying to protect you. Your protective self is basically thinking, don't relax. Don't feel safety. Don't feel peace. Don't feel calm, because if you do, something bad will happen and that's going to cause a lot of pain. So rather than deal with that pain, let's stay hypervigilant 24/7. That is so unhealthy for the body. Another emotional difficulty that you might face is dissociation, where you feel detached or disconnected from your body. It's basically your mind's way of dealing with the constant chronic emotional pain that you're dealing with. It's like, okay, if you're going to stay and I can't take you away from the situation, right? Because your nervous system can send you signals. But if we don't listen and we wind up keeping ourselves in a situation that's dangerous, then our nervous system has to adapt to that. And it's like, okay, adult you is not removing you from the situation. So I'm going to numb you out so that it can mitigate the pain that you're dealing with. 3 other situations just came to mind right now that you might deal with if you've undergone narcissistic abuse. One is memory issues. You might forget the details or feel confused about what happened as a result of gaslighting. Narcissists are notorious for rewriting history and then speaking in a way as if they're so confident of their truth that you begin to question yours. The second thing that you might struggle with is a constant need for validation. If somebody refused to allow you to feel good about yourself, if somebody criticized you constantly, making you doubt your ability to perceive how you really are, then you've lost that inner self connection. And so you might find that you're always needing external validation in order to feel like you're allowed to perceive or see yourself a certain way. And then the third thing is physical tension, where you constantly feel tightness in your neck, in your shoulders, in your back, in your arms. For some of us, we have it in our prefrontal cortex, but there's this constant tension and bracing, which comes from the stress that you're carrying. And it also comes from your body bracing for danger 24/7. I know with myself, when I was healing from narcissistic abuse, I looked back and I could check each and every one of those things as a result of narcissistic abuse. So let me know how many you resonate with. Now, the important thing isn't to resonate with these things, by the way, guys. That's not the end game of this video. The goal is to notice it and then shift into, okay, I resonate with that. Now what? Because healing isn't just about understanding the narcissist. That was a big mistake that I made. I would watch narcissist videos. I would learn about the narcissist and be like, yes, yes, and yes. And I would get the validation that I desperately needed so I don't regret it. And I would get the knowledge that, oh, this is a thing, which my gut was always telling me it was anyway. But I got that confirmation as well. But none of that knowledge helped me to overcome any of those 13 things that I was struggling with. So let's talk about what is needed. I want to give you 5 tips that can really start helping you to shift out of learning and understand the narcissist to learning about and healing who you really are on the inside. The person that is still there, but has not been allowed to be there because you had to be someone else in order to survive. So let's get into those 5 tips. The first one is to acknowledge the abuse. And it's not always easy to do. I know with myself, a part of me was like, this is abuse, this is abuse. And a part of me was like, oh no, maybe they're just not understanding. Maybe I can get through, maybe I can explain it in such a way that will help the situation. It was hard for me to understand that patterns that I was in as an adult and that mimicked my childhood were actually abusive. And I still remember to this day when I was getting help and the person across from me was like, you do know that this is an abusive relationship, right? And a part of me on the inside was like, finally. And another part was like, scared to admit it. I want to validate that because the part that's scared to admit it is the part that is part of a coping skill that you develop to keep you safe in childhood. Because to see our parents, people that supposedly care about us, as abusers was way too overwhelming to do in childhood. And so this part was like, don't look at them. Just try to be better. Find that secret formula and everything will be okay. And so the reason I bring that out is because sometimes that first step of acknowledging the abuse can feel like the hardest because you're coming to grips with a truth that your protective self has been hiding from you, possibly for decades. The second tip is to seek therapy, a trauma-informed therapist or a somatic experiencing practitioner, someone that can help you to process the abuse and heal from the trauma that's stored in your body. I'll be honest, depending on where you are in your journey is going to depend on the kind of help that you get. So for example, in the beginning, you might start with a therapist or a coach that understands narcissistic abuse and can help you to break out of the enmeshed relationship that you have. Narcissistic relationships are made up of two people functioning as one person. So before you can heal, you have to separate from that person. So a talk therapist, a coach, a trauma-informed coach, or therapist familiar with narcissistic abuse is a great place to start. Once you separate from the narcissist, though, that's where you want to seek out someone that has some kind of somatic therapy to help. To me, the three most powerful ones that I found to be so helpful and that I see are so helpful with others, one is IFS, internal family systems, because it takes you out of just learning from your head and it takes you into looking at the pieces inside of you, right? Your different parts, they call them. With myself, I do somatic experiencing. That to me is my favorite. It's why I got trained in it because it helped me to heal my own nervous system. And now I use it with all of my clients as well. And with somatic experiencing, I like to call it somatic parts work, where we really spend time with the different parts of us that are holding the trauma. And then the last one is EMDR. EMDR is a hugely, hugely powerful trauma-informed therapy. However, I will say this, I wouldn't recommend doing EMDR as someone that has had to heal my own trauma until you learn how to have safety inside your body first. Because EMDR is going to bring up your trauma, which we have to do in order to heal. But if we don't have safety, it's going to feel so scary and so overwhelming that our body's going to resist it. Or we're going to get flooded with emotions that we're not ready for, and we're never going to want to do anything again, which isn't good because that pulls us out of the healing journey. So just remember, the order is important, starting with something that helps you to separate from the narcissist, then something that helps you to work on your nervous system. And then if you still need help, that EMDR afterward is an amazing combination. Number 3 are grounding practices or nervous system regulation tools. The reality is that narcissistic abuse is constantly, chronically provoking your nervous system to either go into hyper activity or hypo. And when we leave the narcissist, our nervous system stays exactly as it is when we leave the narcissist. Kind of like if I have a problem with my brakes and so I go park my car. Well, if I do nothing to that car, 5 years later, guess what? I'm still going to have a problem with my brakes. Well, it's the same thing with narcissistic abuse. I might leave the narcissist, but if I haven't done anything with my nervous system, it's going to stay hyper or hypo or swinging in between with no regulation. And so getting a routine of practices, grounding practices that help us to retrain our nervous system to feel safe being us is vital. Number 4 is setting boundaries. Once we're healing ourselves, we have to shift out of the unhealthy patterns that allowed us to get sucked into unhealthy relationships, right? I have to take accountability that I had no boundaries. I had to take accountability that I was caring too much about making someone else happy, even at the expense of myself, and that was not healthy. And so learning how to strengthen our boundaries, learning how to uproot the beliefs that make us feel like we're not allowed to have boundaries, that's a huge part of it. And then the last one I wanted to mention is connect with support groups. Being in a community with people that really get it, a community where you can actually start being yourself, practicing, right? Exercising the muscle of authenticity in a place where you're not going to get judged or rejected or feel shamed. It really starts helping you to strengthen who you really are. It's encouraging because you start seeing other people shifting out of the traumatized personality and into who they really are as well. So I'm going to leave in the link here for the School of Transformation as a possible community support for you. I meet live on Zoom with survivors from all over the world, and we do the healing work together. So I want to leave that there for you to check out in case it might be helpful for you. So as a recap, narcissistic abuse is like an invisible poison that silently and slowly kills you from the inside out, draining your life force much like carbon monoxide. It's subtle but deadly. The physical, emotional, and psychological side effects are real, and they're experienced by so many. Healing from this type of manipulation isn't easy. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say you're going to watch 1 or 2 videos and you're going to be healed. It is a process. It is layered, but it is possible with the right support and tools. Just remember that you're not alone and that healing takes time, but it starts with at least recognizing the abuse, finding help, and starting with small steps towards recovery. And again, don't forget to be consistent and to go deeper on your recovery. I invite you to check out the School of Transformation. So stay strong, take small steps, and remember you can heal. And there's always help if you seek it.